Great. Welcome you guys to the East Meets West track. I'm Allison. I'm from JoyPac, and I'm super happy to be in Seattle. I lived here for over a decade of my life, and so it's super fun to be back. I actually started my gaming career here at PocketGamer.biz 8 years ago. This was as they were transitioning really from Facebook to mobile. I helped them build their first analytics team, and then I moved on from there to game analytics and to Movie Star Planet, and now I'm at JoyPac where I oversee operations. Today I'm going to talk about hypercasual games, and hypercasual games I know have been talked about a lot, maybe over-talked about over the last couple of years, but I'm going to narrow in specifically on the trend in China and then talk about what we've learned launching hypercasual games in China over the last year. Hypercasual. It's a new word in the gaming industry's vernacular. It's come about in the last couple of years, and it means these games that are very easy to pick up. They have short play sessions, the quick core gameplay loop, and they have very broad appeal. I want to emphasize that these games have always been around, maybe, starting from Flappy Bird in 2013 to Crossy Road in 2014. These are two of my favorite games, actually. Hypercasual is more about the simple gameplay. It really is a term that's come to denote a new business model and a new way of doing business for studios. So hypercasual is a playground for developers that really thrive with this rapid pace of development. Voodoo and Ketchup are really the kings of hypercasual right now, and you can see that they're launching 50 games a year in the App Store. So it is all about this pace. It's about scale, and again, it's a way of doing business. So hypercasual has come about not just because these publishers started publishing hypercasual games, but because there is a demand in the market for these types of games. The players really are there as well. First and foremost, this is because it complements other gameplay. You can see here with this that 78% of hypercasual players also play other games that are in-app purchase-driven that have maybe more in-depth gameplay. So it's really supplementing gameplay for people with these hypercasual games. Now this leaves 22% of players that are only playing hypercasual games, and they do so for a really specific reason, and that's because they have limited amounts of time. Hypercasual games engage these players who don't have time to play other games, and it's really expanding the pie of players as a whole. This EDAR report says 75% of players play while they're doing something else. They're waiting or they're doing some other multitasking. So the short sessions that you see with hypercasual games are really appealing, and there's a lot of market demand for them. So hypercasual is a trend that's really moving from west to east. So I want to transition and talk about that in particular now. The way that hypercasual has come about in the West has been slightly different. In the App Store, first we had these casual games that were driven out of Facebook gaming. They were driven with these social mechanics and smart in-app purchase triggers. From there, we went into more in-depth gameplay. These mid-core games really mastered virtual economies. And then we had core gameplay that really was further catering to these in-app purchase whales. And that's when hypercasual came. It was a bit of a backlash or nostalgic revival. This is a term that was quoted. There's a great series of articles in PocketGamer talking about the rise of hypercasual by someone from AppLovin, and I definitely recommend reading that to get the whole history. But I love this term of a revival or some kind of backlash because it really is back to the basics of gameplay, taking advantage of a new business model. So in China, it's a little bit different. The story is there. It's the same different types of games. It's the same kind of range of games, I would say, but Chinese players have come about to hypercasual really starting from core. So core genres have ruled the top charts in China forever, and this is a result of predominantly PC play that's been so dominant in that region. Consoles were banned in China, and so all players of all types flocked to playing games on the PC, where free-to-play monetization mechanics really flourished. So they are coming about hypercasual from core down the line. And this has made hypercasual come about a little bit more slowly in China. But that said, it's definitely happening there. These are 4 of the games that were in the top 10 downloads last week, which are definitely hyper-casual titles. By comparison, in the West, 10 out of 10 of the top 10 downloaded games right now are hyper-casual games. That's not the case in China. It's only 4 of the top 10. So this is just showing that it's been a little bit slower to evolve in China, but it's definitely happening, and the trend is definitely there. Another reason why hyper-casual has been a bit delayed in China is because of the advertising ecosystem. Hyper-casual really relies on showing advertising to as many ads as possible to get your LTV up, but then buying users with a low CPI. So this ecosystem needed to be in place in China before the trend could really catch on there. So at this point, we do see eCPM and CPI levels that really mirror the West, in particular on iOS. So it is a very viable business model there. I do want to say that the advertising ecosystem in China is different than what's in the West. So there are different players, there's different networks that you need to be looking at and working with. So while it's the same activities around UA campaigns and ad monetization optimization, it's a different methodology. You can't just transfer what you're doing from the West and apply it in the East. So it's slightly different over there. So another key challenge to operating in China is, of course, the government regulation. I think many of you know this, but last year the Chinese government locked down licenses for 9 months of the year. They opened back up again in December, but then they closed back down again because they had too much of a backlog to get through. So we see a slow trickle of games getting licenses now at this point, but there definitely is a big queue, and it takes a long time to get through that queue. This is not necessarily a problem for hyper-casual, though, I should say. Hyper-casual games, again, are driven by advertising, and on iOS in particular, regulation are largely around in-app purchases, so hyper-casual is a little bit of a way around that. There's less scrutiny in terms of this business model. That said, the regulations are still very much being defined, and it's something we watch very closely. Let me take a drink here. So yeah, the next challenge I want to talk about in China are the app stores. So the Android app store market in China is dominated by large tech companies, internet service providers, and cell phone manufacturers. And it's really fragmented across many stores. So like you can see here, you need to be on at least 15 of these stores to get this market coverage. But really, you need to be on a large number of them so that your IP is protected in the region. So that's a major challenge getting into China. So I don't want to scare you too much about talking about the challenges of China, because really the market opportunity in China is huge. There are 800 million mobile phone users across Android and iOS devices. And if you're looking at just the iOS devices, it matches the total number of devices that you see in the US. So there's 242 million iOS devices alone. So it really is a huge chunk of the market and lots of opportunity there. The other thing about China is that it's a mobile-first culture. Mobile phones are much more integrated into people's lives in China. This was because the rise of mobile phones really was aligned with the rise of their economy. So they do everything on their phone. They spend a lot of time on their phone. This leaves a lot of time for gaming. App Annie was speaking earlier today, and they said that in the West, players play half an hour to an hour of gameplay on their phones, whereas in China, it's more than an hour per day on their phones. So it's a pretty significant chunk of time that players are dedicating on their devices. So yeah, JoyPac was founded a year ago. We celebrated our birthday last Thursday with cake and champagne and all of that. We came about because we saw these problems in the market and we saw the opportunity there, and we really wanted to help Western developers get into China. Our solution is a blend of West and East. When you're working with JoyPac, you're working with our team in Copenhagen. This includes everything you would expect from that with our open communication, and that's where your legal contracts are as well. Now, we also have a very Eastern, get-it-done style of teamwork. We have over 20 people operating out of Beijing, and they handle our live ops and our launching, and they give us access to those relationships that are needed in China to do business. So that's my sales pitch. Now I want to talk about the traction we've had, the games that we've launched, and in particular what we've learned from doing this. In this year time period, we've launched 20 games total. More than 10 of them have been this year. I love this because I'm a data person, like I said, so we have a lot of data and insights between the games we've tested and these games we've launched. So what have we learned? Let's take a look. Now, the first thing to be thinking about in China is about the character development in games. While hypercasual are really focused on blocks and balls in so many of these different titles, in China that doesn't work as well, in particular for the marketability of the game. An example of this is Fluffy Fall. This is a game that we worked with What Games out of Paris to publish in China. We changed 3 of their characters, of those fluffy characters, to reflect the Chinese New Year that was happening at the time of launch. And this really helped with our click-through rate. All of our advertising UA metrics were improved because of this, and also our retention and engagement in the game also improved. Maybe because of the predominance of more in-depth gameplay, storylines, all of that the Chinese players are coming from, there really needs to be something that they relate to in your game to help with those 2 things in particular. Another thing we see work really well in China is just this self-deprecating humor, really awkward scenarios. This is something that has been really fun to play around with. This is a game called Skip School, and like the name suggests, it's all about the nostalgia around and kind of fantasy around skipping school. This was something that players really wanted to share and talk about, so we saw some very, very high organic rates with this game. I think over the lifetime of the game at this point, it's averaged 7 organic installs for every paid install we've put into it. So again, some of the virality you can influence and others you can't. Maybe you can't understand the humor in particular of what will hit over there, but there are things that you can do to influence virality, and in particular, you can support it by putting in the social sharing hooks. For China, that means hooking into TikTok and WeChat in particular, and then really providing your users with things that they can use to create content for those channels as well. Yeah. Day 7 retention. I just want to talk about day 7 retention as the most important number, maybe, in hyper-casual gaming in particular. In the industry, we talk about D1 retention being so important, and I do think it is, but I also think that it's a little inflated how much we talk about just this one number. Day 1 retention will tell you how good your gameplay is. So is your core loop working or not? You need to get your day 1 retention above 40% to have a good enough game, but day 7 retention in particular is going to tell you if your game will make money. The lift you see in lifetime value when you increase day 7 retention by 1 percentage point, so from like 10% to an 11%, for example. The lifetime value is 10 times more than if you increase day 1 retention by 1 percentage point. So again, focusing in on that day 7 number is super important, especially for hyper-casual games where your margins are very, very thin. This is extremely important. Go for 40%, of course, with your day 1, but beyond that, focus all of your efforts on D7. Something that's very particular to China, of course, these short bursts of gameplay are what hyper-casual is all about, like I mentioned before, but while still very short, Chinese players have relatively longer session lengths than you see in the West. So we're talking like 3 to 5 minutes for hyper-casual games as opposed to 1 to 3 minutes. This is something just to be aware of, that it has design implications around your gameplay and engagement mechanics, and also around your ad monetization placements. So be aware of the longer session, but also within that longer session, keeping it fun and snackable at the same time. So maybe a stringing kind of series of gameplay together, for example, to cater to these longer session lengths could be impactful for your LTV. Talked about this a little bit as well with Fluffy Fall, with localization. For these hyper-casual games, you really need minimal localization and culturalization. But that said, it's very important. This means doing it right. So you need to translate your text, of course, to simplified Chinese, and don't use Google Translate to do that. It also means potentially modifying some of the content and characters and colors. My last point about what we've learned is around showing advertising to Chinese players. They really have a high threshold for interacting with advertising. And of course, there are very elegant ways to putting ads into your game. Rewarded videos in particular are much more appealing to all players globally. Those types of ads have less of an impact on your retention. But for Chinese players, they're very willing to have ads splashed at them. So put in every type of advertising you have available to you. I'm talking banners, interstitials, and of course all of the different playables and rewarded video. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to say about hypercasual, the trend in China. For the most part, it's the same thing of what we've seen happen in the West, moving to the East, maybe a little bit more slowly, and of course nuance to this audience as well. Again, it's a very huge opportunity, and I hope this inspired you to consider China as a whole, China for your hyper-casual games as well, and maybe giving you some concrete steps to take to have success there. And of course, I would love to talk to you about that and how JoyPac can help. I can talk with you afterward, and I'm also happy, I think I have maybe 1 minute to take some questions. Yeah, cool. Yes?
Do you see hyper-casuals in China also adopting IAP and casual or core mechanics as hyper-casuals evolve?
Yeah, definitely. That is a trend with, right, we were seeing that it's a backlash, but also I think as hyper-casual has matured, we've had to start putting in more engagement mechanics and all of that, so that is coming. I think because some of the games are the same hyper-casual games that are working well in the West, just go East kind of as is, so they're bringing those mechanics with them as well. So yeah, definitely. I don't know if pervasive, but they're working their way down from core down, right? So those mechanics do work very well over there and are needed. And so they might not hit as hyper-casual as we've gotten in the West, where games are super basic, right? Like very trimmed down. I don't know if they actually will ever get there because, like we've seen with the characters around UA, you do need a little more depth to the games to have success.
We have time for more questions if you have. People are very shy.
Yeah. I'm very happy to talk with you guys afterward as well. Just catch me. We'll be around, so appreciate your time today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the track. There's a great lineup, so thank you very much.